The dust in the abandoned farmhouse moves only when the door sighs open. Light falls in thin, exhausted lines, settling over the warped floorboards as if time itself has stopped to breathe. The silence is dense, almost physical, carrying the weight of years that refuse to speak. This is where it began, Texas, summer of 1972, when the world looked away for just long enough for something irreversible to settle into the shadows. And now, decades later, the air still holds the faint, stale imprint of what happened to Maribel Rowan, aged 27, a woman with a quiet life, a hopeful future, and a name that never found closure. The room no longer remembers the footsteps that once crossed it, the voice that fell silent here, or the life that was taken with a precision too calm to be impulsive. The investigator standing in the doorway, Elias Mercer, veteran, methodical, lets the ambient weight settle over him like an old coat. He had walked this room once before, younger, sharper, certain he understood how cases worked. He remembers his own mistakes as clearly as the stale odor of dust and wood rot drifting through the stillness. There is no melodrama in his expression, only a muted return to a space that continues to hold its breath, as though the truth might still be preserved somewhere beneath the years of quiet. His boots make a soft, deliberate sound with each step as he moves forward, treating the room like a fragile memory. He glances toward the far corner, where the original investigation halted on uncertainties, incomplete notes, and assumptions that felt solid then. Maribel Rowan had lived a modest life, working as a local archivist at a small regional history center. Soft-spoken, known for her careful handwriting, and for the way she organized information as if preserving stories safeguarded the entire town. She had no enemies on record, no unpaid debts, no conflicts worth filing. She was described as steady, gentle, the kind of person whose disappearance felt impossible until her body was discovered here, in this old farmhouse just outside Laredo, as if placed by someone who didn't want distance, only quiet. Mercer's eyes settle on the faint outlines on the warped floorboards, where once the chalk tracing had been drawn. The shape is gone, erased by weather and time, but its presence lingers in the investigator's memory. He breathes once, slow, steady. The old scent of dust rises. Papers whisper faintly in the far corner, stirred by the warm Texas breeze easing through a cracked window pane. "Should have seen it," he murmurs, fragments of a voice not intended to be heard. The guilt feels structural, woven into the air. The early reports had been thin. No weapon found. No witnesses willing to speak. A single set of footprints outside blurred by heat-warped soil. A watch belonging to Maribel, its hands broken at a time investigators could not rely on. A torn page from a regional archive book found in her pocket, its edges smudged with something no lab in 1972 could identify. Now standing in the stillness again, Mercer studies the peeling paint on the doorframe. A tiny detail he once dismissed flickers in his mind, so small, so familiar now, but back then invisible beneath the rush to categorize the scene. He doesn't touch anything yet. He lets the quiet carry him back into that first examination, when he was a junior investigator, still convincing himself he understood how truth behaved. Today, the air feels different, not offering answers, but no longer hiding them either. Something changed recently. Something surfaced. And that is why he is here, returning to the frozen moment where an entire story had been halted mid-sentence, waiting for a correction. The farmhouse stands still, but something beneath its silence begins to shift. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. It happened on an ordinary morning, December 3, 2024, long after anyone expected movement on a case that had been boxed into the past. Mercer sat alone in his office reviewing old paperwork when a sealed envelope was delivered from the State Archives laboratory. A quiet label read, Reanalysis, Rowan Case Materials, Confidential. Inside, a single photograph, grainy, faded, but unmistakably tied to the torn page found in Maribel's pocket back in '72. The new digital enhancement extracted something the old investigation never caught, a partial symbol faintly visible in the margin. At first glance, it seemed decorative, a small geometric mark. But the lab report attached revealed it wasn't random ink at all. It was a stamp belonging to a limited batch of archival books used only by 3 employees at the time. 3 individuals who had unrestricted access to materials Maribel handled daily. 3 individuals the original investigation never examined closely because the page had been considered incidental. The symbol changed everything. And the reason was simple. One of those 3 employees had recently passed away, leaving behind storage boxes containing old work records, personal notes, and an item that should never have existed. A thin folder labeled Rowan, holed in the same handwriting Maribel once used for cataloging. Except the notes inside weren't hers. They were someone else's observations about her movements, her work habits, and her final days. Someone had been watching her. The discovery triggered the automatic reopening protocol. By afternoon, Mercer was assigned to the case again, this time with the weight of experience, not the eagerness of youth. He felt the echo of the past tightening around him, a reminder of how easily details slip through hands when certainty replaces caution. So he returned to the farmhouse. He returned to Maribel's last trace of silence. He returned because the evidence demanded it, because the torn page was no longer a fragment. Now it was an entry point. He moves through the farmhouse slowly, the lab's printed enhancement folded neatly in his pocket. The image has already burned itself into his memory. The symbol, an angular, almost triangular mark, was used for tracking restricted archive materials. Only designated staff could authorize it. Why was it on a page Maribel carried outside of the History Center? Why tear it out? Why carry it with her on the night she disappeared? Mercer's mind sorts through possibilities, not dramatizing them, simply weighing each one like evidence on a scale. There had to be intention behind the page, not noise, not accident. He kneels near the corner where the old paper remnants used to lie. Though they're long gone, he looks at the floor the way one looks at an old photograph, seeing what is no longer there. A breeze shifts again. Dust lifts. The house hums with the faint sound of settling wood, a sound almost like a long exhale. Mercer stands and studies the window frame. It had never been checked for prints because the scene had been considered secondary, believed to be a place the body was moved to, not where the act happened. But the enhanced stamp, the surveillance notes from the deceased employee's belongings, and the timing of events now suggested this location might have been the actual origin. He opens his notebook and writes a single line. Reevaluate entire scene as primary. Possible internal workplace connection. The new evidence doesn't provide closure, it provides responsibility. The weight settles deeper. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. Back at the municipal records office, Mercer pulls out the old case boxes, 4 of them, stacked neatly but worn at the edges. They have the smell of paper that has absorbed decades of quiet. When he opens the first box, the scent rises. Dust, dry ink, cardboard, faint traces of mildew. The atmosphere shifts into something almost tactile. The past feels close enough to reach into. He spreads the original reports across the metal table. The fluorescent lights overhead buzz faintly, a thin electrical hum that anchors him. His movements are controlled, deliberate. No rushing, no assumptions, only examination. He starts with the timeline. Maribel left work at 6:14 p.m. She locked up. She never made it home. Body found 2 days later. He reads the statements again, slowly, letting the silence between sentences speak. Coworker 1. She seemed distracted that week, didn't say why. Coworker 2. She asked about old land records, just curious. Coworker 3. Last person I saw her with was. The line stops. The page ends abruptly, like someone removed the rest of the sentence. Mercer frowns. He checks the original copy. Same cutoff. No addendum. No clarification. In 1972, the missing information was attributed to incomplete testimony. Today, it feels like a fracture worth tracing. He moves to the scene sketches. Nothing dramatic, just outlines, notations, distances measured in feet and inches. But in the bottom right corner, scribbled lightly, are 2 initials. LR, the junior officer who drafted the sketches. Mercer remembers him vaguely, nervous, meticulous. He had transferred departments shortly afterward. Mercer circles the initials in red, not as a suspect, just a thread. From box 2, he retrieves the photos. Faded, grainy, but the angles are still legible. He studies the alignment of shadows, remembering the window's position, the time of day the scene was shot. Something feels off, not a clue, just an irregularity. He checks the logbook, photos taken 10:17 a.m. But the shadows in one photo, falling left instead of right, suggest early morning light. Maybe 8 a.m., maybe earlier. Why would the timestamp be wrong? He flips more pages, finds the soil analysis, finds the weather report from July 1972, finds a line he once overlooked. Unusual soil disturbance near east fence, conclusion inconclusive. The wording annoys him now, too soft, too non-committal. He reads the line again. Something shifts in his memory. He pulls up the enhancement of the torn page and studies the ink smudge pattern. Something about it aligns with the soil report, not visually but conceptually. He breathes slowly. The pieces are faint, scattered, but beginning to lean toward each other. He reopens the file containing Maribel's last known research assignments. She had been cataloging land ownership records from the early 1900s. Dry material, nothing worth risking anything for, or so it seemed. He turns another page and finds a notation in Maribel's handwriting. Section 12, missing certificate, follow-up required. Section 12, a quiet reference, barely noticeable. Mercer underlines it. He studies her final hours again, studies the note, studies the torn page, studies the surveillance-like folder found in the deceased coworker's belongings. Then he writes another line in his notebook. Overlooked details are not random, they are directional. The room remains still. The hum of the lights becomes background. Guilt settles again, not sharp but steady. Something small was missed, something logical, something devastating. Mercer continues reading. The room where Mercer conducts his review is quiet except for the soft shuffle of pages. The fluorescent lights leave a pale wash across the files, giving each document a faint, ghost-like presence. He draws a slow breath, steadying himself before opening the binder that lists every person connected to Maribel in her final week. The list is longer than it once seemed. Time pushes names into obscurity, and now they must be pulled back into the light. He begins with the 3 archive employees, the only individuals who had access to the restricted materials marked by the stamp found on the torn page. Suspect 1, Harold Vance. Age then 42, senior archivist. Known for his methodical habits and calm demeanor. His original interview stated he left work at 5:55 p.m. the night Maribel disappeared. He claimed he went straight home, where his wife confirmed his arrival shortly after 6. But Mercer circles one line in the transcript. He was unusually quiet that evening, the wife had said. No elaboration, no follow-up question. It had seemed irrelevant then. Motivation, none obvious but access direct. He turns the page. Suspect 2, Edra Collings. Age then 33. Efficient, precise, often distant. She had worked closely with Maribel, though not socially, as she had testified. Her alibi involved being at a community event the evening of the disappearance, with several people vouching for her presence. She had no recorded disputes with Maribel, no tension. But she did have keys, and she handled the books with the restricted stamps. Motivation, unknown. Opportunity, possible. Mercer underlines her name but does not dwell. Something about her statements had always felt too neat, clean lines without friction. He turns to the third. Suspect 3, Lionel Grady. Age then 29, junior archivist, a quiet figure new to the center at the time. He was the one who recently passed away, leaving behind the secret folder filled with notes about Maribel's schedule. His alibi in 1972 involved being home alone, organizing personal papers. No witnesses. Not unusual, but unhelpful. Motivation. Obsession, perhaps. Professional rivalry. Personal curiosity. Something akin to fixation. But the notes he left behind were not aggressive or emotional. They were observational, almost clinical times, dates, patterns. Not a diary. Not a confession. More like surveillance. Mercer sits back, eyes narrowing. The torn page was logged as something Maribel removed herself. But the stamp's presence means she accessed something restricted, or someone handed her something she wasn't meant to have. He moves deeper into the broader suspect list. Suspect 4, Joaquin Miller. Landowner. His family once owned the abandoned farmhouse where her body was found. He had no direct link to Maribel, but Maribel had been researching land certificates, records that intersected with properties once held by Miller's grandfather. His original statement was brief. He had no knowledge of the crime and had been away on a fishing trip. The alibi had never been firmly validated. Motivation: to conceal something in the land records, to prevent discovery of missing or falsified documents. Mercer taps his pen on the table, a dull sound, rhythmic, careful. Suspect 5, Colin Rusk. Local newspaper assistant who occasionally visited the History Center, spoke with Maribel twice the week she vanished. His interviews suggested casual interactions, questions about old township photographs, nothing more. But his tone in the transcripts read as evasive, fragmented. He described Maribel as kind, quiet, sometimes too curious. A strange remark. Mercer notes it again. The motives differ. The alibis scatter in all directions. Nothing overlaps cleanly. But something aligns beneath the surface. Small inconsistencies, patterns that had once been dismissed as noise. Mercer reminds himself. The case had not been closed because of overwhelming confusion, but because the investigative lens had been too narrow. Today, the lens widens. He reopens the soil analysis report, finds the name of the officer who collected samples. C. Rowan. No relation to Maribel, but the coincidence had caused subtle confusion in early logs. One overlooked detail. The samples taken from the farmhouse did not match any soil from the surrounding fields. Instead, they matched disturbed soil from a nearby fenced area, one that was never fully excavated. Harold Vance had mentioned once in passing that he walked past that fenced area on the day Maribel vanished. His statement was dismissed because he claimed not to have seen anything, but Mercer underlines it now. If the soil disturbance matched that location, perhaps someone had been there with her. Suspects begin to converge, not in identity but in proximity. Who had been near that fenced area? Who had access to restricted materials? Who had reason to observe Maribel closely? Each name gains weight. Each alibi thins under scrutiny. Mercer closes the binder, exhaling slowly. The room remains silent, as if it, too, is evaluating the list. Clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. It begins with the torn page, the quiet hinge on which the entire case turns. Mercer spreads the enhanced photograph beside the original field notes. The geometric stamp now appears sharper, unmistakable, but the ink smudge pattern interests him more. Not a random smear, not damage, a deliberate covering motion, as though someone had tried to blot out a name or number before the page was torn. He adjusts the desk lamp. The light pools across the photo, exposing the faded underside of the smudge. He sees something faint, the outline of a digit, possibly a 2 or 7. Not enough to rely on, but enough to reconsider the meaning behind the page. Why tear out a page with partial marking? Why carry it inside a pocket on the night she vanished? Why risk being seen with it? Mercer turns to the surveillance-like notes found in Lionel Grady's belongings. They are structured more like checklists than personal observations. Example: 6 of 14, MR leaves building. Same pattern as prior days. Asked about section 12 again. Conversation with EC, unclear tone. The initials trouble him. EC, Edra Collins. Their interactions had been described as professional, nothing more. But if Lionel had sensed tension, however subtle, that tension mattered. Even the quietest emotional rifts can generate pressure. Mercer reads deeper. MR carrying book not from her project. Not typical for her. Another fracture, another small shift. He pulls Maribel's personnel file, finds a note from 2 months before her death. Requested temporary transfer to catalog room, denied due to staffing limits. Denied by Harold Vance. Another piece that fits, not cleanly but directionally. He sets several pages side by side. The arrangement forms a mosaic of small contradictions, nothing dramatic, nothing sensational, but each pointing to a subtle strain within the archive staff. A quiet friction, the kind that simmers beneath polite behavior. Mercer remembers something Maribel's sister said during the original interview. She cared about the truth in records, maybe too much. At the time, it sounded like simple admiration. Today, it feels like a warning. Section 12. Missing certificate. Tension with coworkers. Surveillance notes. A torn page. Fenced soil disturbance. Each detail sharpens the focus. He returns to the old crime scene photos, one taken near the east fence line. The vegetation appears flattened in one corner. The original report labeled it, likely animal activity. But Mercer leans closer. The flattened patch is elongated, not round. Human shape? No, but a sign of kneeling or bending. Someone had been searching for something, or burying something small. He flips to another file, utility records, finds an oddity. 1 day before Maribel vanished, the History Center requested access to older property maps for internal audit purposes. The request was signed by Edra Collins. Mercer circles it. Collins had insisted she had no interest in land documents. Another fracture. The inconsistencies aren't pointing to guilt, not yet, but they point to emotion, small tensions, quiet conflicts, the kind that produce mistakes. Mercer writes a line in his notebook. Conflicts hidden in silence leave clearer traces than loud ones. He studies the room again, letting the patterns settle in his mind. The silence feels thick, as if waiting for him to see what has been there all along. He reopens the timeline. The surveillance notes say Maribel left at 6:14 p.m., but the building alarm logs show the door opened again at 6:23 p.m. A second exit, a second person, not logged, not questioned. The past begins to shift. Emotionless truths form a path. Conflicts emerge quietly. Motives surface without theatrics. He prepares himself for the next stage, confronting the possibility that the smallest, least dramatic detail may become the devastating twist. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. Mercer sits in the dim office, the only light coming from the lamp angled over the papers. His hand moves slowly across the table, adjusting the overlapping documents like pieces of a muted puzzle. The names of suspects run through his mind again, but one, just one, keeps returning, not because of guilt, but because of absence. Not presence. Absence. A person who never appeared in the suspect list because their role was too small to be considered. A person who handled paperwork routinely, quietly. A person whose initials appear in small corners of old files, not as evidence but as administrative markings. The junior officer who drafted the scene sketch in 1972, Lr. Leonard Rydell, 24 at the time, transferred departments 3 months after the case. There was never a reason to suspect him. He was not connected to Maribel, not tied to the archive, not mentioned by coworkers, not linked to land records. His notes were sparse, factual, professional. But one detail tonight unsettles Mercer. The timestamp discrepancy on the crime scene photographs. The shadows. The light angle. The only person responsible for labeling the photos that morning was Rydell. Mercer retrieves the original photo logbook. The handwriting matches the scene sketch initials, precise strokes, clean lettering. Then he finds something else. A correction mark. Small, nearly invisible. The original timestamp had been erased lightly and overwritten. He pulls another file, utility records from the farmhouse property. One employee had been assigned to inspect abandoned county structures in 1972. Name listed, Leonard Rydell. Mercer's pulse stays steady, his expression controlled, but something inside clicks. Rydell had reason to be near the farmhouse before the crime. He had access to the structure. He knew the layout. He drafted the scene diagram. He corrected the timestamp. And he never appeared in the suspect list because his role seemed administrative. Mercer opens another box, miscellaneous logs, finds a handwritten note that had once been dismissed as irrelevant. Officer Rydell delivered materials to archive, June 28. Delivered to the archive. The same archive where Maribel worked. The same archive where restricted materials were stamped. The same archive whose staff believed only employees handled books. He delivered something. He entered the building. He interacted with staff, however briefly. Mercer feels the shift, not emotional but logical. The devastating kind that arises from small details aligning with quiet force. The torn page with the restricted stamp. The missing certificate in Section 12. The surveillance notes. The soil disturbance. At the center is not obsession, rivalry, or land disputes. At the center is access. Access disguised as routine. Access disguised as insignificance. Rydell had interacted with the archive building before Maribel's disappearance. He likely knew she was cataloging Section 12. He possibly delivered the restricted materials she later questioned. If she confronted him, quietly, privately, without filing a report, it would never have reached official channels. Her nature was gentle, cautious. She hated conflict. Mercer flips to the final overlooked detail, the missing line in coworker 3's testimony. Last person I saw her with was Rydell. Delivering materials. Walking out beside her. The line wasn't cut. It was removed. Mercer lowers his head slightly, letting the weight settle. The least suspected person, someone administrative, peripheral, invisible, had been the unseen thread woven through the case. A faint sound enters the silence, paper shifting under the lamp's heat like a whisper. Nothing more needs to be added. The logic stands on its own. The evening settles over the records office like a thin veil, dimming the edges of the documents spread across the table. Mercer stays seated, unmoving, letting the weight of the case linger in the stale, paper-scented air. The puzzle is no longer scattered. The fractured lines now converge in quiet, undeniable coherence. And with that clarity comes a muted heaviness, one that belongs more to time than to emotion. He studies the file labeled RYDELL 1972 one last time. It lies open in front of him, a simple folder, its corners softened by decades. Nothing about it looks dangerous. No bold handwriting, no dramatic markings. Just paperwork, routine, administrative, forgettable. Yet in the folds of its quiet presence, the entire truth had been waiting. It is almost unsettling how ordinary the truth looks now that it has surfaced. Mercer turns the pages with slow, careful movements. The details line up with unembellished logic. Rydell's access to the farmhouse, his unscheduled deliveries to the archive, the corrected timestamps, the altered testimony, the faint shadow of his presence that no one noticed because it carried no story, no emotion, no dramatic reason to suspect him. He had slipped through the cracks precisely because he left no impression. He was not the charismatic suspect, not the tense coworker, not the frustrated landowner, not the secretive archivist. He was the man who stood quietly at the edge of the frame. A person easy to overlook. A person easy to dismiss. A person easy to forget. Mercer breathes in slowly. The air tastes faintly of dust, metal, and the thin dryness of old records, an atmosphere shaped by unspoken years. He writes the final notation in the updated case summary. Evidence supports administrative oversight as the catalyst. Sequence logical, no contradiction, proceed with formal closure. Yet closure does not feel like a victory. It feels procedural, mechanical. Another step completed, another box checked. The truth, once revealed, is not triumphant. It is still, muted, quietly heavy. He leans back in his chair. The overhead light flickers once, settling into a steady hum. He can't stop thinking about Maribel Rowan, her gentle routines, her careful handwriting, her soft presence in the archive hallways. He pictures her adjusting the spine of a book, aligning it with quiet precision, unaware she was walking beside someone who understood her patterns better than she knew. A line from the surveillance note surfaces in his mind. Same pattern as prior days. Not written with emotion, not written with care, written with observation, detached, silent, analytical. Rydell had studied her the way he studied his assignments, with minimal interpretation. A person of structure, not sentiment. someone who saw patterns more clearly than people. And Maribel, driven by respect for accuracy, might have questioned something he carried or delivered, something that didn't match the record she expected. A certificate, a document, a detail, one flaw in the archive system she believed in. Truth for her wasn't an idea, it was a practice. Mercer closes the folder gently. The room feels colder now, though the temperature hasn't changed. He stands and gathers the files into a neat, methodical stack. The rustle of paper echoes faintly, a small sound in the wide, quiet room. He turns off the lamp. Darkness settles softly across the desk, but the outlines of the boxes remain visible, ghost-like shapes in the dim glow from the hallway. The silence that follows feels thick, like the stillness of the farmhouse on that first day he stepped inside again. A thought lingers in his mind, muted but persistent. Truth doesn't always reveal itself in sharp signals. Sometimes it sits behind the smallest detail, waiting for someone patient enough to see where it leads. He carries the boxes toward the evidence room, each step slow, almost ceremonial. The echo of his boots travels through the empty hallway, filling the space where voices once moved, a reminder that cases leave impressions even when they're technically complete. Inside the evidence room, the shelves are lined with histories, solved, unsolved, partially understood. Each box holds fragments of human lives, arranged with the mechanical precision of procedure. Mercer slides the Rowan case into its designated place, the cardboard scraping lightly against the metal shelf. He pauses with his hand still on the box. The justice delivered today is accurate, logical, earned through patience and pattern recognition. But it does not feel warm. It does not feel relieving. It is simply correct, a quiet alignment of facts. He inhales, lets the breath out slowly. The truth, he realizes, almost never looks the way people expect. It isn't always the loudest suspect, the clearest motive, the dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it hides in administrative marks, in faint shadows, in overlooked handwriting. Sometimes it lives in the quiet corners most people never look at twice. And sometimes, like now, it emerges long after the moment it should have mattered most. Mercer closes the evidence room door, listening to the click of the lock settling into place. He stands still in the dim corridor, letting the faint hum of the building wrap around him. Outside, the evening sky has darkened into a deep, muted blue. The streetlights cast thin pools of light onto the pavement, soft and distant. He walks toward the exit without hurry. The weight of the solved case sits in his chest, not heavy like sorrow, not sharp like guilt, but steady, like the understanding that some truths arrive only when time is ready to uncover them. As he reaches the door, he glances once at the row of windows reflecting the quiet interior. For a brief moment, he imagines Maribel's handwriting on one of the panes, small, precise, gently curved, marking a final note he will never read. He steps outside. The night air carries the faint scent of dry grass and distant asphalt, the kind of smell that belongs to Texas evenings. It feels familiar, grounding. Behind him, the building stands silent, holding stories that have finally settled. Mercer looks toward the horizon where the last trace of daylight fades. There is no dramatic ending here, no triumphant declaration, no emotional resolution. The truth exists now as a fact, not a feeling. A completed line, not a comforting one. He adjusts his coat, breathes in the cool air, and walks toward his car. Each step is steady, unhurried. Justice has been served in the mechanical sense. But something human remains, quiet, unresolved, lingering like the dust that still floats inside the abandoned farmhouse where this began. Truth may not always be visible on the surface. Sometimes it waits in silence, patient and unassuming, until the right moment arrives to be seen. And even then, it leaves behind a shadow that never fully disappears.